Right now, one of your hands is probably moving. Maybe it's clicking a pen. Maybe it's twisting a ring, tapping out a rhythm nobody asked for, worrying the corner of whatever's in reach. And for most of your life, somebody has been telling you to stop it. Sit still. Quit playing with that thing. Pay attention. So let me open with the part they got wrong. The part this entire video is about. You were never supposed to stop. That restless little motion in your fingers isn't a flaw. It isn't a lack of discipline. It isn't a bad habit you were supposed to outgrow somewhere around the 8th grade. It's a need. A quiet, stubborn, astonishingly old human need. And by the time we're done here, you're going to understand exactly why you have it, and why the people who tried to shame you out of it were pointing you in precisely the wrong direction. Because here's what makes this strange. That habit you've been half apologizing for your whole life has a history. A long one. Longer than your school. Longer than your country. Longer, honestly, than almost anything you'd instinctively reach for to compare it to. And if you look closely at the objects humans have built for the single purpose of being fidgeted with, you start to notice something that should not be possible. So here's the question I want you to hold on to for the next half hour, because everything hangs on it. Why is it that people who never met, who lived on separate continents, prayed to entirely different gods, spoke languages that don't share a single root, all independently reached for the exact same object? A small loop of beads, meant to be touched, not read, not worn for decoration, touched, rolled between the fingers, one after another, over and over, for no reason a stranger watching could ever see. That's not a coincidence you can wave away. When one culture invents something, that's history. When two do, that's trade. But when a dozen unconnected civilizations all land on the same little tool, at roughly the same moment in their development, with no way to have copied each other, that's not culture anymore. That's biology poking through the surface. That's a need so deep in the wiring of our species that it keeps expressing itself in the same shape, again and again, no matter who you are or when you were born. And I promise you this, by the end of this video, you'll understand 3 things you almost certainly don't right now. You'll understand what your hands are actually doing in those moments your mind wanders, the real, physical job they're quietly performing. You'll understand why the people who tried to ban this instinct, your teachers, your managers, entire school districts making the evening news, had the science very nearly backwards. And you'll understand why a cheap plastic toy, confiscated from a 12-year-old in the spring of 2017, belongs to the same ancient family as some of the oldest tools our species ever made. But we can't start at the toy. To get there honestly, we have to start where it always starts, with your hands, and the thing they've been trying to tell you your entire life. Start by watching yourself, just for a second, the way an anthropologist would. You click the pen, you bounce the knee, you spin the ring, chew the cap, twirl the hair, drum the fingers in that little galloping pattern that seems to run itself. You have, statistically, spent a genuinely enormous fraction of your waking life doing things with your hands that accomplish absolutely nothing. And you've probably filed all of it under the same quiet, faintly embarrassed heading: nervous habit. Something you do when you should know better. Something a more composed person wouldn't. But that framing is where we go wrong, and it's worth slowing down on, because it colors everything that comes after. You've been taught to read your own restlessness as a defect, a small leak in your self-control. And so it never occurs to you to ask the more interesting question, not why can't I stop doing this, but what is this actually for? Because a behavior that shows up in every human being who ever lived, that costs energy, that persists no matter how many times it gets punished out of you, that behavior is not a glitch. Evolution doesn't spend that kind of effort maintaining a mistake. Evolution is a cold, impatient accountant, and it does not keep paying for something that doesn't earn its keep. And to see what it earns, you have to leave your own hands behind for a while and go looking through history. Because the instinct you're apologizing for left fingerprints all over the human record, real ones, objects, tools, built on purpose, whose entire reason to exist was to give restless hands something to do. Start with the beads. Somewhere over 3,000 years ago in the north of India, people praying began to keep count of their prayers on a loop of knotted beads, a mala, most often 108 of them, drawn one at a time under the thumb. Now, the official story is that the beads were a counting device, and that's true as far as it goes. But watch what the hand does, because the hand tells you the part the official story leaves out. The fingers don't just count, they settle. The thumb finds the next bead, and the next, in a rhythm that never has to be thought about, and the mind, freed from keeping the tally itself, sinks into the words. The counting was the reason they gave. The touching was the reason it worked. And that distinction, the counting versus the touching, is the key to the whole mystery, so hold on to it, because it explains what comes next. Look at how deliberately the object is built for the hand and not for the eye. The beads are sized for the pad of a thumb. The loop has no beginning and no end, so the fingers can move through it forever without ever having to stop and start over. It asks nothing of you. It demands no skill, no thought, no attention at all, which is precisely the point, because attention is the one thing it's trying to leave free. This is not the design of a counting device that happens to feel nice in the hand. This is the design of a soothing device that happens to count. And you'd expect something built that specifically, that perfectly tuned to the human hand, to belong to one culture and quietly stay there. And here's where it gets strange, exactly as I promised you it would. That same object, a loop of beads, drawn one at a time through the fingers during prayer, did not stay in India. It appeared, independently, in traditions that had no idea the others existed. The Islamic misbah, its 99 beads counted off for the names of God. The Christian rosary, moving through the Hail Marys bead by bead. Prayer ropes among the Orthodox monks, a knot pulled through the fingers with each repetition. Different faiths, different centuries, different corners of the map. The same little machine for the hands. Now, in case you're wondering whether that's just religions borrowing from one another, a fair thing to wonder. Watch what happens the moment you strip the religion away, because that's the real tell. In Greece, sometime in the last few hundred years, someone did exactly that. They took the prayer beads, cut the prayers loose, and kept the object purely for how it felt to use. They called it the komboloi, the worry beads. It counts nothing. It means nothing. It has no God attached to it at all. A Greek man will sit at a cafe and run those beads through his fingers for an hour, flipping and swinging and rolling them in patterns his hands invented on their own. And if you ask him why, he'll shrug, because the honest answer is the one this whole video is circling. It just feels right. Peel off the faith, peel off the counting, peel off every justification a culture ever bolted on, and what's left underneath is the bare human impulse itself, the hand, wanting something to hold. And it wasn't only beads. Somewhere on the same coastline, people had been carrying smooth, flat stones, worry stones, a little hollow worn into one face exactly where the thumb sits. You hold it in your palm, you rub the thumb back and forth across that hollow, and something in you eases. Nobody engineered that hollow on purpose. Thumbs did it, over years, over generations, wearing the stone down to fit the very motion that soothed the person holding it. which is a quietly extraordinary thing when you think about it. The tool didn't shape the habit. The habit shaped the tool. Travel east and you find it again, wearing yet another face. In China, going back to the Ming Dynasty, people rotated a pair of small metal balls in one hand, Baoding balls, they came to be called after the city, turning them around one another in the palm, slow and steady, sometimes for hours. The tradition dressed it up with claims about health and circulation and vital energy, the way traditions always do. But underneath the claims, the same machine is running. Two smooth objects, a repetitive motion, a hand that has finally been given a job, and a mind that goes quiet while it works. And notice when, across all of these cultures, people reached for these objects the most, because that timing gives the game away. It wasn't in their easy hours. It was in the hard ones. The beads came out during grief, when there were no words left and the hands needed somewhere to put the pain. They came out in waiting, the long, helpless waiting of the sick room, of the harbor, of the night before something you can't control. Soldiers carried them into war. Sailors worked them through their fingers on watches that never seemed to end. Wherever human beings found themselves trapped in a stretch of time too heavy to simply sit through, the same solution surfaced on its own. Give the hands something small and rhythmic to do, and the mind can survive the weight. These weren't toys. They were instruments for getting through the worst of being alive. So step back and look at what we've actually assembled here, because the pattern is the whole point. Prayer beads in India, prayer beads across the Islamic world, the rosary in Europe, worry beads in Greece, a worn stone shaped by a thumb, steel balls turning in a Chinese palm. 6 inventions, or a dozen, from peoples who in most cases had never heard of each other. And every single one of them is, at its core, the identical device, a small object, a repetitive, purposeless, soothing motion, given to the hands so the mind can be somewhere else. This is not a fashion that spread. This is a need that surfaced, over and over, wherever human beings sat down and had to hold themselves together. And that's what makes what happened next so hard to forgive. Because for most of human history, we understood this instinctively. We honored it. We built beautiful objects around it, wove it into our deepest rituals, handed the beads down from parent to child. The restless hand wasn't a problem to be corrected. It was simply part of what it meant to be a person under pressure, something to reach for when you were grieving, or waiting, or afraid, or just trying to think a hard thought all the way through. And then, somewhere in the last century or so, we changed our minds about it. Hard. The modern world, with its rows of desks and its factory bells and its deep, almost religious faith that stillness equals seriousness, looked at the fidgeting hand and decided it was a defect after all. Sit still, hands flat on the desk. Stop that tapping. We took the oldest self-soothing instinct our species has, and we reclassified it as rudeness, as distraction, as a failure of character, and eventually, for a great many children, as a symptom. The very same motion that a monk's rosary was built to encourage, a teacher would now confiscate a pen for. We didn't just stop honoring the instinct, we started punishing it. And if you went to school anywhere in the last few decades, you already know how that punishment feels from the inside, because you lived it. You know the particular heat of being singled out for tapping a pencil, the click of the pen that turned an entire class around to stare, the teacher's hand held out, palm up, waiting, and the small, private humiliation of surrendering whatever your fingers had found to hold. Somewhere in most schools there was a drawer, and in that drawer sat a little graveyard of confiscated things. Pens, erasers, folded scraps of paper, squeeze balls, anything a restless hand had reached for. Nobody in that building would have described it this way. But that drawer was a museum. Every object in it had been locked away for committing the very same ancient crime, helping somebody hold themselves together the only way their body knew how. And nowhere did that punishment get louder or sillier than in the spring of 2017. Because that's when the fidget spinner arrived, and for a few genuinely bizarre months, it was everywhere. A little three-pronged disc with a bearing in the center, spinning between two fingers, doing nothing at all. Kids traded them, ranked them, filled entire school hallways with the faint whir of them, and the adult world lost its mind. Spinners were banned in classrooms across the United States, across Britain, across country after country, declared a menace to learning, a distraction, a plague. Grown adults went on the news to warn about the danger of a spinning toy, and nobody, in all that noise, stopped to notice the joke sitting right in the middle of it, that they were banning the newest member of a family, thousands of years old, that the thing they were prying out of a child's hand was the plastic great-grandchild of the rosary and the worry stone and the Baoding ball. But the spinner has one more twist in it, and it's a bitter one. The kind of story that tells you everything about how we treat the things we don't understand. Because the popular version goes like this. The fidget spinner, the story says, was invented back in the early 1990s by a woman named Catherine Hettinger, who filed a patent on a spinning toy. And then, in 2005, unable to spare the few $100s it cost to renew that patent, she let it lapse. So when the craze finally exploded years later and the money came pouring in by the truckload, she, the supposed inventor, didn't see a cent of it. A woman gives the world a toy, the story goes, and the world gives her nothing back. Now, that story deserves a harder look, because the truth turns out to be murkier than the clean little parable everyone shared. Hettinger's patented design wasn't quite the spinner that took over 2017. The modern version's real origins are tangled and disputed, with more than one person able to claim a piece of it. So the robbed inventor tale is probably too tidy to be entirely true. But hold on to why that story spread so fast anyway. Because it's revealing. It spread because it fit what we already believed. That the fidget spinner was a frivolous nothing, a fad, a piece of junk that made someone else rich by accident. We could not see it as what it actually was. And so we did to the spinner exactly what we'd been doing to the fidgeting hand for 100 years. We dismissed it. We banned it. We laughed at it. We treated one of the oldest impulses in human nature like a passing embarrassment. And the whole time, in the classrooms, in the offices, in the confiscation drawers filling up with pens and putty and little plastic discs, one question was going completely unasked. The only question that actually mattered. Not, how do we make them stop, but, what if they were never supposed to? And that, finally, is the question a handful of scientists decided to take seriously, while the rest of the world was still busy confiscating. They stopped treating the fidget as a behavior to eliminate and started treating it as a behavior to explain. What is the restless hand actually doing? What job is it quietly performing that the body keeps insisting on it even when every authority in the room is trying to shut it down? And the answer they started to find flips this entire story on its head, because it turns out the fidget was never the enemy of focus at all. It was one of its oldest tools. Here's what they found when they finally looked. When your attention has to hold on something, a lecture, a phone call, a hard problem, a long, boring meeting that refuses to end, part of your nervous system is always straining against it, restless, looking for the exit. And a small, repetitive, undemanding motion gives that restless part a place to go. It's not stealing attention away from the task. It's absorbing the excess energy that would otherwise pull your attention off the task entirely. The tapping foot, the doodled spiral, the bead under the thumb. They're not the distraction. They're the thing keeping the distraction at bay. They occupy the part of you that can't sit still, so the rest of you finally can. Picture it as two engines instead of one. There's the part of you doing the work, following the words, holding the thread of an idea. And underneath it, there's a second engine that never fully shuts off, a restless surplus of energy that has to go somewhere. When you force yourself to sit perfectly still, that second engine doesn't switch off. It just revs harder and harder against the brakes, until keeping still becomes the entire job, and there's nothing left over for the thing you were actually supposed to be doing. The fidget is the release valve. It hands that second engine a tiny, harmless loop to run, a bead, a spin, a doodled spiral, and the instant it has that loop, it stops fighting you. Stillness, it turns out, was never the state of maximum focus. It was the state of maximum effort, spent on not moving. There's a study people love to point to here, and it earns the attention. Researchers had people listen to a dull, rambling recording, the kind your mind slides right off of. Half of them were allowed to doodle while they listened. And when it was over, and everyone was tested on what they'd actually retained, the doodlers didn't do worse, the way every instinct in that confiscating teacher would predict. They did better, meaningfully better, recalling close to a third more of what they'd heard. The idle scribbling that looks, from the outside, like someone checking out, was the exact thing keeping them checked in. And once you understand that, you understand why the movement soothes as much as it focuses. Because that same repetitive motion appears to speak directly to the nervous system's stress machinery, the part of you that floods your body with alarm signals when the world gets to be too much. The steady rhythm tells that system, in the only language it really trusts, that things are under control, that there's no emergency here. Slow, predictable, self-generated motion, the roll of a bead, the turn of a stone, reads to the deep brain as safety. It's the same reason we rock a crying baby, the same reason a frightened person paces. Repetition is how the body talks itself down off the ledge, and your restless hands have been fluent in that language since before you could speak a word of any other. Which also explains the moment the urge grips you hardest, the moment you know best of all. It isn't when you're panicking, it's when you're bored, when the meeting drags, when the lecture flattens into noise, when there is far too little happening to hold you, and your mind starts clawing at the walls of the room. Because understimulation is its own kind of stress. A brain starved of input doesn't relax. It revolts. And the fidget is what you feed it, a small, self-made trickle of sensation, just enough to keep the restless engine idling instead of tearing loose and dragging your attention out the nearest window, which is the cruel little irony sitting at the center of this whole story. The habit ambushes you in exactly the dull, still, sit quietly and behave situations where you are least allowed to indulge it, which brings us, at last, all the way back to where we started, and to the group of people who feel this most sharply of all. For anyone whose attention runs faster and hotter than the world around them expects, the kids who couldn't sit still, the adults who still can't, the ones told their whole lives that the fidgeting was the problem. This is the part that lands like a verdict finally overturned. Because for them, the movement isn't a bad habit layered on top of the difficulty. It's the body's own attempt to solve it. The stimming, the tapping, the spinning, the endless need to have something in the hand. That's not the noise interfering with the signal. That's the antenna they built to catch the signal in the first place. And every time it got confiscated, every time it got shamed, someone was taking away the exact tool that was helping. So look again at everything we've laid out, all of it at once, and let the size of it land. The mala in India, the misbaha and the rosary, the komboloi with the prayers stripped off, The stone worn to fit a thumb, the steel balls in a Ming Dynasty palm, and yes, the 10-cent plastic spinner they banned in 2017 and laughed off as a fad. These are not separate things. They never were. They are one unbroken instinct, wearing 1,000 different faces across 1,000 different centuries, and every one of them is doing the same quiet, essential work, steadying the nervous system, holding the attention, talking the frightened animal in us gently back down. Which means the schools didn't just get it a little wrong, they got it backwards, at the deepest level. The thing they were prying out of children's hands to help them focus was one of the oldest focusing technologies our species ever invented. You were never broken. Your restless hands were never a lack of discipline, or a nervous flaw, or a habit you failed to grow out of. They were doing maintenance. Quiet, constant, ancient maintenance. The same work they've been doing for every anxious, grieving, thinking, waiting human being who ever reached for a bead in the dark. We tend to imagine our oldest tools as the dramatic ones. Fire, the blade, the wheel. But some of the oldest tools we ever made were the smallest and the softest. The little motion that keeps the mind from tipping over. Passed down not in museums but in the hands themselves. You didn't pick up the habit, you inherited it. And the next time somebody tells you to sit still and stop playing with that thing, you'll know what your hands already knew all along. So that's the real story of the fidget. Not a fad, not a flaw, but one of the oldest quiet technologies we have. Now I'm genuinely curious about one thing, and this is where you come in. Tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and while you're down there, tell me your fidget. The pen, the ring, the beads, the thing you didn't even realize you were doing until about 8 minutes ago. I read them. And if this changed the way you look at your own restless hands even a little, do the small thing that keeps videos like this one going. Subscribe, so the next one finds you too. Your hands, of course, already know what to do.